So, all right. I am so excited to be here tonight with Dion Dior from Australia, nature journaler, natural science illustrator, botanical artist. I'm really glad to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Marley. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Great. Yeah, and I found out about you first on Instagram and loved some of the drawings and nature journal pages that you're doing that and posting on there. So could you show us some of your pages? Like I know you do a lot of botanical stuff, but also birds and other insects and animals. Could you show us a couple of your pages to give people an idea who haven't seen?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm kind of a mishmash of styles, and I think part of that has happened really through osmosis as the skill kind of develops. But here's sort of like a fun one. I don't know if you can see that, but that's your typical Australian scene, nature journal scene. This is the iconic Kookaburra, which really does sound like it's in hysterical laughter. And if you've got multiple kookaburras in a group, which they do, they tend to, not be too far away from each other. It sounds like there's this great in-joke going on. You really want to be a part of it. A lot of seaside stuff, really important to me. I love, all that kind of bits and pieces. And then, let me see, I'm all confused on this side. They're just some butterflies. I just love nature journaling, and I think that there's just so much you can do with it. There's a whole bunch of feathers. We have some amazing birds here in Australia, and at this time of year especially, the birds molt their breeding plume, and their breeding plume is spectacular. So they change colours to breed. The males especially become really colourful, and after they've mated, they shed all their coloured feathers. So I run around collecting them all. There's some gum leaves and so forth. Some of my favourites, I'm a member of the Queensland Naturalists, and so they do quite a lot of adventures, I suppose. And so, there's, again, all the feathers. There's the butterflies. Now, most of the stuff in here I've done from live specimens.
Mm-hmm.
But, let me just show you what I think is just iconically Australian when it comes to, there's so many. Of course, a matter of finding it. There's a page full of some leaves.
Ooh, yeah.
Just leaves. The leaves here, they don't fall the same as they do in places like the States, especially where I am, because most of the leaves here are evergreen.
Mm-hmm.
And so depending on the nutrients in the soil, they sacrifice leaves all year round. And so the leaves, you get mostly green, and then you get all these little drops of beautiful, bright, jewel-coloured leaves at any time of the year. There's your typical Australian Huntsman spider. Lots and lots of those.
Mm-hmm.
I do love bugs.
Uh-huh.
So this is just sort of my big iconic kind of journal. There's a one with a really sad. Oh, hang on. Let me see if I can get it.
Yeah,
on
I
screen.
saw that. Is that an embryo? Is that a bird still like undeveloped in the egg or something?
It's a bird that I found had fallen out of the nest.
Oh wow.
On the ground, and it was obviously brand new hatched, and it was really transparent, and all these colors, you could see the insides of the bird. And I ummed and ahed about nature journaling this,
Right.
but it had me absolutely fascinated. And to be honest with you, I think it's a really important part of nature is the food cycle and I guess the life cycle. I have no idea what kind of a bird it was. It was approximately 8 centimeters, so probably about that big on the ground. And then I thought, you know what, I'm going to, because, nature journals need to reflect nature in all her, in all her facets. And so it can't just be about beautiful, iconic pictures. I think it's if you're really interested in the patterns of nature, then it's important, I think, to look at all facets of it. So I did it. I put it in there, and I don't show that one too often because it kind of freaks people out. But
Yeah, yeah, that's a
shells.
really interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, I've come across a few dead birds, and it's always sad.
Mm-hmm.
This is a Huntsman Spider Egg,
Oh, wow.
and I've actually got the actual egg here.
Wow, wow, that's amazing. So that's like
Yeah,
there's multiple eggs in one of those.
no, that's the egg sac of a
Okay.
Huntsman spider. So the
Uh-huh.
Huntsman spiders are very, very large here. They're
Oh,
huge,
wow.
and this was attached to a leaf. So if you can see the actual picture, that was how
Yeah.
it looked when I found it.
I thought it was zoomed in or something. Wow.
No, that's life size.
Oh my gosh.
And the sac, it feels like like a marshmallow or a peep. I don't know if you can
Uh-huh.
see it, but
Yeah.
there's the opening.
Uh-huh.
Hang on, where am I? There, and that all of that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little huntsman spiders would have emerged from there,
Wow. Okay,
and
this
it's
would be
kind
a
of
good point
spongy.
for people who have like arachnophobia to practice, being okay with it, or maybe like pause the video and come back in a moment. I know I personally post a lot of spider related things like on my Instagram, and then sometimes I get feedback from people who are like, "Oh gosh, that's a lot of spiders."
Oh, if you come here, they're not well. The spiders, I guess, are really obvious, but they're. I have to be honest. When growing up, I was a terrible arachnophobic, and
Okay.
Aussies tend to be in the early stages of our lives because there's so many creatures, and so many of them are venomous or
Yeah.
harmful in some way. And then as you get older and as you develop a deeper love of nature and all of the elements of nature, you tend to it desensitizes you a little bit. And where I live up in the subtropics of southeast Queensland, there is a lot of big spiders,
Hmm.
and the golden orb weaver is my favorite, and they weave massive, massive, great web systems in beautiful gold web that glistens in the sun.
Uh-huh.
And then you'll get, they nest in clusters, so you might get, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 very large females. And then the females can be, maybe this big. And then the males are like this tiny. And they all cluster in these huge labyrinths
Uh-huh.
of spider webs. And they're massive, and they're treetops or between trees, and gorgeous. And you can see them from a distance. That's a golden orb weaver.
Nice. Wow. Wow. Look at those details on there. That's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. And the male would be the size maybe of her tiny little
That's
leg.
amazing. I love, that's one of those things I love about nature and looking at some of these other animals and putting in perspective, like, our concepts of like gender or our concepts of like the individual and stuff like that. I'm going to give a little love to the comment section and the people who are viewing. So I see Lori's on here, Jean is on here, John Murlaws is on here. Anetta from Nature Sketches is on here. Ivea is on here. Lori, I think I mentioned Lori already. I think I mentioned everybody that's on here. I'm gonna share this post. Oh, JP is also on here. Jack had a question. John Murlaws had a question about the spider. So just about that, the Huntsman Spider Egg sac.
How big is it?
Yeah.
Well, I have it, as I said, I have it right here. It's probably close to 4 or 5 centimeters that way in
And then the
diameter.
spider, how about the spider, the adult spider?
Oh, they vary, but the bush huntsmans, which are just gorgeous, are probably, they can probably be about 20 centimeters leg span, sometimes larger. The gravid females, which are the ones that are when they're pregnant, their abdomens can be just huge, bulbous,
Wow.
probably this size or larger. We have quite a number of varieties of huntsman spiders here, and they're harmless and they're great, to keep in your house because they eat cockroaches and all sorts of things. I don't personally like them in the house. I've had them drop onto my pillow. And, I remember one night I was lying in bed and I heard this kind of a thump on the pillow next to me, and I just knew. I knew exactly what it was because I'd seen one in the corner of the bedroom. And so I really carefully sort of rolled the opposite way out of bed and turned the light on. And sure enough, there's this great, huge huntsman sitting on my pillow. They're pretty common. They're pretty much everywhere. And a lot of Australians are very arachnophobic, but they're harmless. They're just spectacular. They are one of nature's marvels. Really,
Okay.
you'd totally love it.
Wow. I mean, I love spiders and I really love like following the thread of the conversation, but just I think that just to balance things out a little bit, especially since I promised people we were going to be talking about plants, let's like shift gears. I mean, I could talk about spiders all day long with you, but let's shift gears a little bit towards like the botanical end of things. And I've noticed, on your pages some wonderful like leaves at different stages, and you mentioned how in Australia the leaves fall at based more on like the nutrient cycle than about the seasonality, at least in the part of Australia that you're in. Could you mention more about some of your botanical drawings of leaves? Like I love some of the ones that you have of the leaves that are like partially decomposed or changing colors. Could you show some of those and talk about your process? Oh yeah, I love that page.
Yeah, and look, this is life size, by the way.
Okay.
It's one of the tropical. I can't tell you which one. I need to spend more time learning about it, and that's my mission right now, is to learn more of the science behind it. But one of the things about leaves, and this is universal. The leaves anywhere in the world. A lot of people, especially people starting out with nature journaling, really struggle with a sense of purpose, and they're almost immobilized by their own inner critic or their sense that they don't know what they're doing, or any number of reasons that hold people back from really understanding it. And then they get out in nature and they often don't know where to begin. And so with a lot of people that I spend time with in the Noosa Nature Journal Club, or with the naturalist groups that I'm a part of, the first thing I tell them to do is pick up a leaf, a simple leaf, because they're so beautiful, they're so intricate, and they warrant deep observation, because you can get, colors, you can get forms and shapes, you can learn a lot about a leaf's life cycle, and importantly with leaves, and what I've shown you is my kind of really quality work. Let me show you some of the real stuff. Now, this is not necessarily field stuff, but this is where I go to overcome my own fears and horrors, right? So, here's just what I call exercises in learning how to nature journal. And I got to give kudos to Jack Laws here, because I was struggling with all sorts of stuff about how to get started, what to do, and, reading his books, even as an experienced sort of illustrator or an artist, finding deeper purpose and deeper meaning in my journaling was really important to me at this stage in my life. And it was through his books that I developed almost, a forgiveness and then a bit of a scientific focus. And so things like these leaves, getting out into the field, picking up a leaf, because I didn't know where else to begin.
Yeah.
And you can do, rubbings, you can trace around the leaf and explore the deeper patterns. I've got lots and lots of scribbles. See how scribbly and horrible this is?
Mhm.
And this was all part of my continual learning journey. And the leaves anywhere in the world, I always warm up. And when I'm with my classes or with the nature journal group, the first thing I do for a warm up is say, let's pick up a leaf and let's just journal it to get the cobwebs out. And it's amazing how people get absorbed into their nature journaling when they see an immediate success, which is, something like a leaf or a branch or a stick, any number of things like that. Just practice. And I think it was Jack's inspiration that really helped me move to the next level. There's things like looking at veins and leaf textures and, different ways to capture the colors, and get a better sense of, how to shade. Books are really great for that. Just getting together with people. There's my sad attempt at a pine cone. So, yeah, I really encourage people to pick up a leaf to get started, because they're easy and they're always successful. They always work out, and it's a great confidence builder for yourself to say, hey, I can do this. It's really important.
I love that. I love that also because the built-in metaphor is, in a lot of languages, the word for leaf is the same as the word for a sheet of paper, a leaf of paper. And so, like, the fact that that leaves are so ubiquitous and also such a good starting place, but a place that is not intimidating on the surface, but that you can dive into deeper and deeper and continue to build your skills on and follow like amazing lines of curiosity. And then also this idea of like, and I'm going to ask about this more in a second, like how a journal in that it has so many leaves, so many pages that you can keep turning them and keep the iteration aspect of it really, I think, helps the learning process. So I'm definitely going to remember that about leaves is such a powerful starting place. But tell me a little bit more. I'm guessing it looks like you keep two journals and you use one more for practice, and then you use one for maybe for more like when you do studio work. Could you talk a little bit about your two journal system?
Well, actually, it's more than two, Marley.
Okay.
I have to confess, it's a lot more than two. Okay, so the botanical side of art is like learning classical music. Botanical technique or scientific botanical illustration, it's very detailed. It's very scientific. It's focused on accuracy, measurement, color matching. It's a real representation of the true thing. And I'm absolutely convinced that the art of scientific illustration is coming back, because even though cameras are becoming more sophisticated, it's the scientific illustration that is really important. And I can talk about that later, but let's talk about the journals like you asked. I keep several. This journal, the one that I've been showing, is that's a glossy black, is really about trying to refine and master my skill as an illustrator. So I keep this particular journal, which is just filled with all my stuff, as scientifically accurate as I can. And that's to develop my craft. And I show that a lot. This one, as I've just shown you, is my practice journal and my play journal, my mistake journal. Everybody has to have one. You've got to have a place to experiment and to help you find your purpose with nature journaling, especially as adults. I teach a lot of kids. I work with local primary schools in the area and teach, take nature journaling groups within those primary schools. And, it's really trying to connect back to that childlike wonder and amazement in nature, and recognizing that the skill, it's not a gift. The drawing and the illustration, it's not some unique gift that some people are born with.
Mm-hmm.
It's a skill that's developed over time and practice, and you've got to have places like this to experiment and to play and to make mistakes, and you hide it away, and you don't have to show anybody in the world. And I implore people at any stage of their journey, never, ever, ever, ever rip out pages, because it's all part of your own personal journey and development. It's all part of that experience. And it's so important to be able to look back and recognize further down the track what you did wrong then, how you could have improved that, what you know now, because it reinforces your skill as you've acquired it. And if you keep tearing pages out of these really important journals that no one ever sees, that are filled with scribbles and mistakes and experiments and all of that kind of stuff, then you lose an important part of your journey. So I really maintain, I maintain multiple journals like that. I also have a small one, which, I take, sometimes there's a different purpose in things like this, but these small ones are good for just throwing in your bag when you're not sure what you're going to be doing and you find yourself with some time to nature journal. So nature journaling means you've got to get out in the field. You can't do it from your studio. The studio is the place where I refine my practice, where I explore my love of the art and develop my skills. I spend a lot of time with field guides. And one of the things I find some of the people that I nature journal with don't tend to do is they don't go away late afterwards and then explore what they've just seen or experienced. They do their journal in that moment, in that time, then they shut the book and off they go, get on with life. I like to do more than that. I fill my pages with questions. What if, Jack Laws's recommendations of the I wonder scenario. I wonder what this means, or I wonder why this is happening. And if you incorporate, or if I incorporate that element to my own journaling, then it gives me a much richer experience. So I come home and I look through my field guides and I get on the internet and I try and answer those questions. And mostly I don't, but I do follow my thread of curiosity a lot further than I ever would have expected to do. So with the books themselves, I've got those ones which I've shown you, and then I've got my real field nature journal. And this is where the stuff in the field is probably happening more, and it's loaded with, I do a lot of habitat sketches when I'm in the field, because it's important with certain things is to find where they live and what the habitats are like. There's kookaburras laughing. One of them is sitting on this guy here. When a kookaburra laughs, it stretches its neck up. They go all the way up to this huge long tubular thing, and they're laughing hysterically. They're beautiful. And I'm not going to ruin everybody's idea of the laughing kookaburra with why they're actually laughing. Because why they're laughing is they think it's scary, and they're trying to scare other kookaburras off and saying, this is my territory. So it's a territorial chant, and it's meant, so, but I like to think they're telling jokes. This is out of a field guide, okay? I get a lot of people saying, oh, but birds and butterflies and insects, they move so quickly, and you never get, you never get enough of a picture to journal them. And this is where I say, write down notes about what you see. Scribble just like prompts or notes, large, brown, blue, orange, whatever you want to make notes about. talk to people around you about, spend the time observing it. If you know you're not going to have time to draw it, spend the time looking at it and questioning it, and then go to a field guide and see if you can find it. Because if you make notes about what you're seeing, you're more inclined to remember the experience of what you're seeing, so you can identify it later in a field journal. And so that's just out of a field journal, so that I could get a sense of it. So this is the book. This is my real nature journal book, and I plug things into it. Tick, that was on my sock. Nasty little thing it was.
Back to the arachnids. Okay, so this is really awesome. You're kind of making it so I don't have to ask any of I'm noticing I can check off all of these questions that I had planned, because you just kind of naturally went through them. And so I kind of have to reorganize a little bit here, but
sorry.
But just to kind of sum up, it sounds like you have 4 different sketchbooks. You have one that you work on your sort of natural science illustration, very accurate type illustrations. You have your play journal, and then you have a small one, and then you have a field one. Is that like, do you normally kind of do that, or is that sort of just like where you're at right now?
It's kind of where I'm at right now. It's too many. It's a lot, and it's very easy to lose focus, which I do sometimes. But, I tend to move in a number of different directions, and so I want to have the right kinds of tools with me when I do. I'm moving away. I tend to move away from the small one a lot more, because the big one seems to serve my purpose right now. So those 3 are my main ones. Really a field journal, something that you take into the field with you for the purpose of your nature journaling. And I think it can't be too big. It definitely can't be too small. If it's too small, it's not going to work. If it's too big, it's going to be too hard to carry. It's this one I'm working in right now. You'll be horrified to know, as an artist, it's filled with lines. It's just an old journal I picked up from a thrift store, an op shop that we call them here, and it was like $4, and it's just perfect for the field, because we were out nature journaling with the Noosa Nature Sketches last weekend, and it rained. And, it's important to just deal with it, and nobody wanted to get up and move on. They were all quite happy to sit in the rain and continue journaling or move under a tree. And so I wasn't concerned that this expensive sketchbook was going to get wrecked by any stretch of the it was just comfortable. And if you're picking up old journals from anywhere, the paper's still pretty good quality. I'm a huge advocate of quality paper. Otherwise, everything looks horrible. And that paper's pretty good, but it does have lines, which is unusual for me. But it works. It works for the purposes, and it encourages me to write and ask questions and make observations, which I think are all part of it. So, really, I have, that's the main thing. But then I'm a member of 2 naturalist groups. So we have them here. I don't know if you have them in the States, but they're field naturalists, and a lot of scientists here in the Brisbane area, a lot of the university professors in science, natural sciences and places like that, are part of these naturalist groups. And they do a lot of research, and they do a lot of field work, and anybody can join them and go along with them. And this is where I'm a huge advocate of.
I want to get into that a whole bunch at some point. I think right now I want to check in with what people have been commenting. It seems like there's a lot of people watching this live, so that's really awesome. Thanks for joining in, everybody. And I want to just sort of go back through these comments here and see some of these questions. So There's definitely some questions about the materials that you use. Loretta Armstrong on Facebook is asking if you use watercolor, colored pencil, or something else. I think that was back when you were showing some of your leaf sketches. And then there's also questions about some of your studio tools. And I think, this discussion about like how many journals to have, and you did a really good job of talking about like what's important to do in the field. And it sounds like you have a very integrated practice where you do homework as well and have some good self-awareness around that and what you're going to follow up with at home. I know sometimes people create a lot of homework for themselves when they're out in the field and then don't always follow up or have less energy, less juice to do the work in the field, or vice versa. So maybe could you talk a little bit about the materials you use and how that's related to, like the difference between the field and the studio?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's important too. I think first and foremost, anything you take into the field has to be small and portable and accessible. I notice especially people starting out have a tendency to carry big kits with every kind of pencil and so forth in that you can possibly have. I have the smallest of my field kits is this, which is, this is a notebook. And when I'm walking or hiking or with people who are not going to tolerate sitting down and sketching, and I don't want to lose the opportunity to get out into nature. So you don't always have time. So I have a small notebook, and I got this on the recommendation of one of the field biologists in the naturalist group, a hardcover notebook, and you just make notes in the field. I have a ballpoint pen that I always take into the field, and I've taken felt tip, and I've taken, technical pens and fountain pens, and, I got a lot of inspiration from the Urban Sketches group about what they take out, and it's impossible because it's a very different experience nature journaling as it is to urban sketching. And ballpoint pens are just reliable. They're just utterly reliable. And when you get out into the field, you realize that you don't have the comfort to lay all your materials out. And, if you can't access stuff really quickly and easily, then you don't tend to do it. You don't use it. You don't stop. And you want to be able to just grab something really quickly and know it's going to work and either sketch or get down what it is that you're trying to capture in that moment. I see Jack's made a comment about how much he loves ballpoints. Yeah, I do too. And once again,
he gets the really cheap ones. He always says, get those ones at the hotels or whatever, the cheapest, the cheapest. I'm still not totally on that train with you and him, but go ahead, keep talking about the.
No, that's right. I use these ones where they have the different colors, and a lot of the scientists use these in the field. Because you can make different notes using different colors.
Yeah.
So, you can use green for observations and red for questions or any number of things. Anyway, it gives you a bit of color
right.
I use a lot of ballpoint pen, and then I'll put color in if I can in the moment. If I'm sitting down, I'll definitely use color, and I do prefer to use watercolors. And I've got a couple of different kits. This is my very, very smallest. But, watercolors can be expensive. And when I was first putting together a kit, I was using my good watercolors, and they were beautiful and I love them. But I found that they were getting dirt in them, or they were getting rained in, or, here, you get a lot of bugs and what have you. And they were getting, they were getting into my watercolors. And I still journal with those mostly, but I got to put together this. And this is a little tiny little tin that I picked up from one of those $2 shops. And these are just water-soluble crayons, right?
Wow.
Which water-soluble crayons.
Yeah.
And I just cut the ends off them, and I just put a little dropper of water in the bottom of this tin. And then I just sat each one in the water.
Huh.
and it dilutes the bottom of it and they act like glue, and so they stick into the tin. And I just, if you can see, I just go in with my water brush, and
Yeah.
they're brilliant.
Wow, that's
And
so
it's
cool. I've never
tiny.
heard of that
Yeah,
before.
yeah. They're just cut off watercolor crayons. And these are only the cheap ones. You can get really good quality watercolor crayons, or you can get a lot of paint sticks. And I've noticed people using the Daniel Smith paint sticks. They cut the ends off the Daniel Smith paint sticks and do the same sort of thing, or they drop those little pieces into a palette, and then they just use water to adhere the stick to the bottom of the palette,
Okay.
and boom, there you go. Because if they're solid, they're less likely to melt, or dilute in varying conditions. And here it's very humid, so the watercolors tend to react to the humidity. They get very soft.
Mm-hmm.
They don't. So, and then I just have, this is just a pencil, just one of those mechanical pencils, cheapy, and a water brush. And that's that goes everywhere with me. But with my group, I have just a bag that I sling over my shoulder. Now, I've had backpacks. I've got a lot of backpacks, but I find that when I'm nature journaling with a backpack, it's a pain in the butt to try and get the thing off, turn it around and dig into it and find what you want and pull it all out again. And it became frustrating, and I'm not as young as I used to be, and it was painful. It was physically painful. So I got this, and I think you talked about it in one of your shows, and I know certainly Jack Laws has talked about it a lot, about this over-the-shoulder sling kind of bag, and just the fact that it sits there and you just dig in and it's accessible. And so I have another one of these, ballpoint pen. I have a mechanical pencil. Don't bother with sharpeners and blades and all that business in the field. Do it in base camp or in your studio. I have, this is, my main nature journaling kit. It's just one of these little foldery sort of pencil case things that I just picked up. Yep. And there it is. Okay. So it's got, can you see that very clearly? Yeah. It's got a selection of, I've got the felt tip, a couple of different felt tip Thames. I love to work in sepia ink. And these are the waterproof. I love sepia. It just adds, it's more natural. And so you can do a lot, it does a lot for your drawings when you do them in sepia. And there's a couple of gray colors, and then there's a couple of blacks. I have a water-soluble graphite pencil, which I find really helpful because it's great for shadows, and you just run the graphite pencil around wherever a shadow would be, a little bit of a scribble of graphite pencil, and then you just dilute it under a leaf or under something, and you've got this great shadow. And everybody goes on about, your shadows are so good. Well, that's my secret, is just a water-soluble graphite. Just an eraser and then a water brush. And on this side, I have my little kit. This is my watercolor kit, and it's just Daniel Smith. And I took recommendations from a lot of people, and I change the colors out depending on, in Australia, for example, if I'm in the outback, we have a lot of red, and there's a beautiful color Daniel Smith make called Aussie Red Gold.
Oh, wow.
On there. And it's lovely for this part of the world. And your typical sort of primary colors. Now here's some of my best hacks, and hopefully everyone will get that. If you go to Officeworks and you want to buy little magnets in Officeworks, they're great. Discard the magnets, but the packaging has these tiny little magnetic plates, right? Inside the packaging. So you buy little magnets at Officeworks, and I put them in a drawer, and I just take the packaging, which is this magnetic plate that holds the magnets in place for display, and I just stuck it in here, and I just put adhesive magnets on the back of my palette,
Uh-huh.
just a little strip, which you buy again at Officeworks, and it just holds on there. How
Wow.
brilliant is that? Yep. Now, similarly, the palette itself, because these little Daniel Smith palettes unfortunately don't open all the way.
Oh,
Okay, so
yeah.
see that? That's as far open as it goes. And so I found if I was using this as a palette, the paint was always
Oh
running
no.
down and
Yeah.
it was driving me crazy. So I thought I've got to do something different because I need a flat surface. Otherwise, the colors mix and you end up having to clean your palette off.
Mhm.
So again, I just went to Officeworks and I picked up just a white display folder, a plastic display folder. And I'm not a fan of encouraging plastic, but sometimes this is worth it. And I just cut a little piece of it off. It's just anything you would use in an office, but it's plastic. And
Yeah.
I just stuck it in there and it's a palette. So
Wow.
it's
Okay. This
it's
is
it's really
really
easy.
so I'm learning about you is that you're really into like the you're really like putting a lot of thought into your gear and like the materials and like fine tuning, and I've kind of lost track. I thought I had you figured out, but now I kind of lost track about how many different kits that you actually have. Could you talk a little bit about like it's sort of reminding me of some sort, like, let's see, what is the analogy here? It's sort of reminding me of some type of like maybe like rock climber or some kind of extreme explorer that has these very particular tools for very particular things. Could you like talk a little bit about like balancing that with like are there any downsides to that, or do you ever have times where you're like sort of overwhelmed by how many different things to choose from, or
Yeah, so here's the thing, Marley. I guess I've been at this a very, very long time.
mhm,
And when I first started out, because nature drawing and sketching has been my thing since I was a kid. It's just what I do. It's what I love to do. And now, thanks to this push by people like you and Jack and Beth and Burton down in Brisbane and a whole bunch of other iconic people who have developed a practice called nature journaling. It's
mhm,
developed a life. And I think the difficult thing for a lot of people is, where do they focus? Where do they start? And if you're anything like me, I cycle and I spin. And
mhm,
over the years, it's like a vortex. I've cycled and spun and developed my own skill and my own practice and my own interest in it in a certain way to become something more focused that works for me.
mhm,
Doesn't necessarily work for everybody else. And I do have a lot of stuff. And at one point, several years ago, when I was running online classes and doing a whole bunch of instruction in art and watercolor and all this kind of business, I got given a lot of stuff. A lot of
mhm.
manufacturers would send you a lot of stuff to try out,
Yeah.
and that was great. So I've had the benefit of trying a lot of stuff, an enormous amount of stuff. And I have an enormous amount of stuff here, but it's not until you get outside, in front of a tree, or looking through a binoculars, or sitting by a river, that it all of a sudden it makes sense what's important and what's not important.
Mm.
And I don't have any confusion at all about if I'm just nature journaling for the love of nature journaling. Always go from the place of ease. It's got to be easy, because if it's not easy for you, it's not going to work. And it's exactly the same principle applies to the materials. They've got to be easy and accessible. You can always go back and try different things and change them around, which I've done many times over. But teaching and guiding through different organizations and, with the nature journal groups that I'm part of, everybody has their own thing. They have their own interests, they have their own preferences. And it's important to me to honor that. And so when I'm trying to guide people to a more permanent and meaningful practice of nature journaling, then I need to understand what works for them and
Yeah.
how I can assist that. So I've got all this other stuff, but I'm pretty clear in my own mind about, what works for me.
Hmm.
And like I said, this works for me. And what's really important for me too, and I think it's really encouraging for a lot of people when they're nature journaling, is the collection of specimens
Hmm.
and touching and holding bits and pieces in nature to make it real. It's part of observation. It's part of my observation. How does it feel? And so I always keep in my kit a little specimen collection as well, to pick up bugs, which I always release back into the wild after I've drawn them and things like that. But beyond that, it's got to be simple, and it's got to be minimal.
Yeah.
Otherwise you don't do it, and you end up carting an enormous amount of stuff into the field with you,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
don't do it. But one of the things I do with the Noosa Nature Journalers is when we meet, we always set up a little base camp.
Mm.
And so I always bring, wherever we go, and we go to all sorts of amazing places, but you've got to park your car somewhere, don't you? So I set up a little table, and I cover the table with field guides or anything I've got, and people bring along their own field guides or whatever they want to do, and it all sits on the table. Then we go out and we nature journal. And then we come back to what I call base camp.
Hmm.
And we commune as a group and talk about what we experienced and talk about what we saw. But I encourage people to leave a lot of their bulky materials or bring along their bigger watercolor kits or their colored pencil set or any number of things that they want to do. Bring them along and leave them at base camp.
Hmm.
And then when we come back to base camp after we've done maybe 2 hours in the field, walking and journaling and what have you, we come back to base camp, and people spend a bit of time then putting in colors or using more of their
Right.
materials at base camp. And that's really great, because then they're not carting them around,
Yeah.
and they're not losing them. I've lost so much stuff, so much stuff, that have dropped out
Hmm.
in the field. And so that's a really good idea. So if you journal with friends, even if there's 2 of you, set up a little base camp.
Hmm.
And a thermos of coffee and some snacks, and you don't
There
have to
you
cart
go.
all that stuff. Take your water, but you leave all that stuff at base camp. Go out and do your nature journaling, if that's easy, and then come back and do more of the detail and
Hmm.
discussion there at base camp. And so you're still out there, and you can still wander around if you want. And I find that the nature journalists that I work with there, they love that idea. They absolutely love it, because they're
Yeah.
not carting so much stuff around. And it helps with weather management too.
Hmm. I can tell you've really put a lot of thought into like how you go about your own nature journaling, how you've refined your materials, and how you teach or facilitate groups. So let's backtrack a little bit, because one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was how you got started with nature journaling. So could you talk a little bit, and we'll definitely talk about the Noosa Nature Journal Club, but could you talk a little bit about how you got started with nature drawing, nature journaling, and all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it started through botanical art, and
Hmm.
I wouldn't say I'm a botanical illustrator, because I'm not that good. There are some extraordinary, talented people, and I have a couple of botanical illustrators in the Nature Journal Club, and
Hmm.
they're amazing. So I don't consider myself a botanical illustrator, but botanical illustration, I think I said earlier, was like classical training with music or classical training with ballet.
Right.
It's really pure technique. It's pure technique. And it's a great thing to learn, because you learn an enormous amount about nature dissection and observation. So I just found that botanical illustration, for the sake of these big paintings that were being produced that never went anywhere. They never did anything. They were just accumulating for me in the corner of my studio.
Mm.
And it was frustrating. I thought they're such a waste. They're not good enough for anything. What's the purpose?
Mm.
I went through a real period of time where I struggled with purpose. Why am I doing this? I
Mm.
know I'm drawn to it, but why am I doing this? And then one day I moved into the sketchbook. I moved into sketchbooks because I was short on space, and I thought, well, I'm not going to produce any more big paintings because it's just a waste of space for me. And I wasn't good enough to really sell them and all that kind of stuff. So I moved into a sketchbook, and sketchbooks were very safe places for me to learn as I was learning. You can shut the book. It's your experience. No one ever has to see it. So you end up following your interest. I couldn't draw faces. I couldn't do portraits.
Mm.
I hated doing architecture. It was mind crushing for me, straight lines. And it just didn't make any sense. I was more drawn to the natural world and things that were not man-made. That was what was interesting. And when I first started to develop my skill, I realized that all artists tend to get drawn towards the subjects that they actually can paint well, that they get a sense of satisfaction from, well, it may not be great, but hey, wow, it was great for me.
Yeah.
Look what I did with it. And that just built my confidence, and it just encouraged me to keep going. So when I'm teaching, I always say to people, follow what interests you and balance it with what you're good at. So if you're really good at portraits and you love drawing portraits, then I encourage you to draw portraits. Let's work through that. Drawing faces was painful for me. I actually felt sick and pained when I was trying to draw faces, especially when I was at college. I couldn't do it. But, you give me a leaf or a flower or a tree or a spider or a bug or a mushroom or any number of things that occur in the natural world, and I got this sort of adrenaline rush of excitement. And I realized I was onto something personally. And, I would walk along a path in the bush, especially dropping my son off at school every day, just looking at the colors in the trees or the way the birds were misbehaving. When the plovers have their chicks, they're very territorial, and they claimed the tennis court at my son's school, and the kids thought that was hilarious, and they'd go out and, step foot on the tennis court, and the birds would go berserk, and they'd all go running, and the kids would laugh. It was delightful to watch. And so I sat down and drew it. And I couldn't do the kids, but I could do the birds. And I loved it. And, then I started developing just little silly stories. So really, I just took notice of what caught my eye and what sort of filled up my heart, I guess, in a way. And combining the two has evolved into nature journaling. And then thanks to the likes of Marley Piper and Jack Laws and a number of other people, you've built structure around the practice that enables people like me to make sense of what I'm doing and pass that on to others who are at different stages in their own personal journey. So, it's the love of nature, and it's the mysteries of what's going on in the natural world. And I don't think any generation before ours has had the terrible, terrible privilege of witnessing the demise of so much of nature right before our eyes. And, I keep thinking to myself, one day this is going to be gone. And the only record of this, especially when some kind of apocalypse occurs and there's no power, the only record is going to be people like us, our sketchbooks, that get locked away in a chest somewhere and someone discovers them 200 or 300 years in the future, and then they can see what we get to see in nature. They can see how these changes in nature are occurring before our eyes. And I feel like it's almost an obligation, not only to try and capture and understand it myself, but to pass both the love and the understanding of nature and the natural world down to the next generations, because there's nothing much I can do beyond what I do now to try and save the planet. But people coming behind me, my children and young people in school who are passionate about, a cause, they're the ones that we need to bring them into a deeper level of understanding about what's going on in the world. And, the more people who understand that and love it, the more people who are prepared to advocate for nature. And that's what this world needs. We need advocates. So, that was my evolution from art to illustration to nature journaling. It became a meaningful thing thanks to people like you and John, because it gave me structure, and it meant I could be a part of something that I wasn't before. I was floating on my own, doing it without purpose, but now I have purpose. And that's powerful for me.
Whew, wow. That is really, we went to the deep stuff earlier in the conversation than I was expecting, but I'm definitely there with you, and also very curious, about the legacy of nature journaling and what it means. And you use the word obligation and privilege that we have to be alive right now, when there's still, if you look, at sort of the trajectory of biodiversity over, the billions of years, there's a large amount of biodiversity right now, and it is changing very fast. And like you said, what that means for the people who are alive right now. And yes, photos are beautiful, and all of these ways of capturing scientific information about these organisms and these places is important. But for one, if I were a member of a future generation, I would love to see some nature journal pages about some of these extinct species and lost ecosystems. So that's something I've thought about as well. And I almost feel like what's that?
That's one of the things we're talking about. This is called a Christmas beetle, right? And growing up, they come out here in Australia at Christmas. And growing up, they were everywhere. Christmas time, the heat brings them out, and they're just, they're beautiful little beetles, and they look like baubles on a Christmas tree, and they come in different colors. Well, nobody sees them anymore. Then I don't think they're extinct, but they're gone. Nobody sees them, and everybody talks about, you never see Christmas beetles anymore because they're gone. And that's one of the things that I found this one dead under a branch, and that's the first one I've seen probably in 25 or 30 years. So that's what you're saying is exactly that. It's like in our lifetime these changes are taking place, and to document them and to draw them and share them and observe them and encourage them, it's powerful.
Wow. Yeah. We're going to get into that more, and I'm realizing, geez, the time is just flying by in this conversation. So we haven't even gone to the lightning round yet, and we also haven't even gone to talk very much about the Noosa Nature Journal Club. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a nature journal club that I started in response to the Nature Journal Club that Jack Laws started, and Bethan has one down in Brisbane. The Noosa area of North Queensland is a very uniquely diverse ecosystem, quite an amazing one. It's a little pocket up at the southern end of the Great Barrier Reef, and it has rainforests, and it's got multiple biospheres and Everglades, and it's pristine. And the Noosa Shire Council has a mandate they've set for themselves, which doesn't allow buildings any higher than 2 or 3 stories. And you can't even chop down a tree on your own property without getting council approval. Yay, thank goodness, because we have an extremely rich ecosystem of animals and insects and reptiles and snakes and so on and so forth. And so there was nothing here. I moved up here and there was nothing here. There was no nature journal group at all. And I tried for 2 years to connect to different people and nature journaling, couldn't find anything. So in the end, I didn't want to drive 2 hours south to Brisbane all the time. So I started one. I started one. I just read John's book about how to start a nature journal club, and I started one, and it's great. It's really good because there's so many places to go. And we've got the ocean right there. We've got the barrier reef a little bit north of us. We've got the rainforest. We've got wetlands. We've got dry eucalypt forests and a lot of stuff. So, and it's wonderful. We're having a great time. And, I've got a lot of naturalists in the area a part of it. And there's some wildflower specialists, and different people step in at different places and share their knowledge. We were in mangroves not too long ago, and that was wonderful. And we were in a wet and a dry heathland last weekend, and we had a wildflower specialist, a lovely lady called Sue Davis, who just took us on this amazing tour and gave us this fabulous history, because we've had terrible bushfires here. And as you know, especially last year and now a year on from those bushfires, we're seeing just phenomenons of nature. There's a wildflower called the Christmas bell that they might see in 1 or 2 stems here and there. Well, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them that have grown up since the bushfires, and all things like that. So I've started this group, and it's wonderful, and we have people coming and going, and it's early days. It's only young, but there's a lot of people that come up from Brisbane, or people that love nature journaling that come from different parts of the Queensland area just to join in, because it's such an amazing place to journal. So
all right, we should probably stop talking about this, because I'm just getting too jealous over here. I mean, all of the stuff I see, and then I see stuff that Paula Peters posts, and Beth and Burton, and there's a lot of nature journalers in Australia, and I see all these posts, and I get a little bit, I follow a lot of biologists and herpetologists in Australia as well, and I just see all this stuff, and I'm like, gosh. But I think it's going to happen someday. And I had more questions about Australia, but I think we're running out of time. So I think right now we should go into the lightning round. Are you ready for the lightning round?
I'm ready for the lightning round.
Okay.
Let's hear it.
Okay, great. All right, so we're going to start off with some short answer ones, and then a little bit of longer answer ones. So the first question of the lightning round of the short answer ones is coffee an essential art supply?
Absolutely. Oh my God, yes.
Okay, great. Do plants have feelings?
Yes, absolutely they do.
Okay, is your studio messy or organized?
It's totally messy unless I organize it.
Okay. Does your family understand your nature journaling obsession?
They accept it.
Okay. Not a yes or no answer, but we'll take it. Okay.
Oh, no, they do. They do. My husband does, because he's passionate about nature too.
Okay. And then the last of the yes or no questions is, do you compare yourself on social media?
Always, and I hate that about it. I try and break down away from it, to be honest.
Okay.
Because if you start comparing yourself, there's always lots of people who are way better than you. And one of the things I tell my students is that the world needs everybody's perspective, everybody's perspective. And so, I encourage people to start their Instagram accounts, because the world needs and should see what their experiences are like.
Absolutely.
So there's a place for everybody.
We'll do a whole nother episode with like a panel of people about that. Okay. If you could, and these are the longer answer ones, if you could nature journal anywhere on the planet, where would you ideally want to go?
I'd love, lots of places in Australia first, because it's one of the most unique places on the planet, and 90% of it is uninhabited, unlike America, where 90% of it is inhabited. But I'd like to go to Madagascar
Mm,
because there's just some amazing. I've nature journaled in Africa, East Africa, and I've nature journaled a lot in the Middle East,
mm,
and South America, and also Asia. Oh my
mm,
God, Asia is just a kaleidoscope of
mm.
creatures. But yeah, Madagascar is where I'm particularly interested in.
Nice one. Okay, if you could nature journal with anyone in history, any artist or scientist in history, who would you want to nature journal with?
Oh, Charles Darwin for
Oh,
sure.
he's winning. So I asked this question to a lot of people, and so far, three people have answered Charles Darwin. Even though in Voyage of the Beagle, he has a lot of bad things to say about Australia, but we'll leave that for another conversation. Okay,
Australia's misunderstood. It's a tough
yeah,
place to live.
especially I think especially might have been quite different in the 1840s. Um, so next question is, if you were stranded on a deserted island, maybe somewhere in the South Pacific, what five nature journaling supplies would you bring with you?
I'd have my book, of course, a ballpoint pen. I'd have a couple of watercolor pencils, and
Okay.
I'd have um, a scalpel,
Oh my
and I'd have,
gosh.
yeah, and I'd have binoculars.
Okay. So I wish I could say scalpel is the first time anyone has said that, but Isabella from Austria also mentioned a razor or some type of dissection tool. So very interesting. All right, I think you'll do well on that desert island. So now, if you could have a superpower, an art or a naturalist superpower, what superpower would you want?
Oh, what superpower would I want? I don't know. Better vision, probably, than what I have. I want to be one of those people, and I know it's actually a phenomenon of it exists where they see certain people see a much broader range of colors
Yeah.
than most of us, and so they see the world very differently. And I think I'd like the kind of vision that can see things like bioluminescence,
Oh yeah.
and or
Ultraviolet or something.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really cool. That people have mentioned vision before, but never so specific on the. Also, some people have asked for like the skill to be able to do perfect color matching of any color that they saw. But yours is unique. Okay, good job on that one. And then the last question for the lightning round that was submitted by Ivea actually is, if you could only nature journal one plant family a year, what plant family would you choose for 2021?
The eucalyptus tree,
So
the
that's in
Australian.
the Myrtaceae, right? That's a cool family.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. I was on a field trip with the Queensland naturalists, and there was a scientist, a very prominent, well-known scientist who specialised in eucalyptus, and he works for the Queensland Herbarium, and he's a field researcher. And he came along with this trip, and we were walking through the bush, and he had this huge contraption over his shoulder and his backpack, and he had all his bits and pieces. And I went up to him and I said, "So what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm collecting specimens." And of course I was just hooked, and so I followed him around, and he specialized in the eucalyptus tree. And the stuff he was telling me about the eucalyptus tree and the life cycles, and they foam when it rains as a way of cleaning their own trunks. They bleed to protect themselves from, insects. And the leaves are shaped and pointed down like icicles because it directs the water. There's so little water here in Australia that it directs any rainwater down through the leaves, down to the roots of the trees. They flower, they go through these cycles of seeding and flowering and fruiting, and their smell is spectacular. When I first started traveling as a young woman, the most difficult thing for me was the loss of the smell of the
Mm.
Australian bush. I
Wow,
missed that
wow.
smell so much. And he told me that every eucalyptus tree in the world that isn't in Australia is native to Australia. They're not native anywhere else in the world. So all of the
Mhm.
eucalyptus trees in the US, in California
Yeah,
and Africa and all these other places, they all come from Australia.
right, right.
And they're just the most extraordinary tree, and the bark is amazing, and they do incredible things. So yeah, that's
Wow.
the
So
short answer.
it sounds like you wouldn't even need to do the whole family. You could just do, I don't know if eucalyptus is a genus or a
I
tribe, but
I wish I knew more about the science of it. But
yeah.
one thing I do know is that while we were on that trip, he found a plant, and we were deep in the bush of the granite belt in southern Queensland, a unique part of the world. And he found this gorgeous little sapling of a tree. And he had this big grin on his face. And I said, "What are you smiling at?" And he said, "This is an unnamed species. This is a
No
brand
way.
newly discovered species." Yeah. And he said, so and he collected the specimen. And as a scientist, he has a license to collect live specimens in the field. And as naturalists, we can't do that. It's
Hmm.
illegal. And I watched him dig this little sapling up, and there were more around it, so he wasn't taking it out of the bush. And the big contraption that I mentioned earlier was a plant press, and it was
Oh,
an old-fashioned plant
oh,
press,
wow.
all wood. And I said, why are you carrying this old-fashioned one? And he said, because they work the best. He said the new modern ones don't work the same. And he had it filled with old newspapers, and he'd had the plant press in the field for so long that the newspapers were dated from the 1970s, and it was the same newspapers. And what he did, he said the paper that those newspapers were actually printed on was slightly thicker and
Yeah,
more pure pulp than they are today.
classic.
And so he said it absorbs the moisture out of the plant specimen. And and so I got this huge technical, scientific commentary about what he was doing. Felt like a complete dunce, of course, because I'm not a scientist, but it just sparked my interest. And he specialized in the eucalypt, and he told me all
Wow.
sorts of beautiful things about it. So it had me fascinated.
Nice. Okay, well, I think you'll be busy with that one plant, even genus, for a full year. So good job in the lightning round. Now, I had a couple other questions to ask, but because it's, getting late and everything, I mean, there's a lot of people watching right now. I think this is maybe a record for the Nature Journal show for a live episode. So that's awesome. Thanks, everybody. Just want to shout out to Ivea, Karina, John Muir Laws. I see Karen Smith Kruger is watching on Facebook. Nature Sketches. Loretta is also watching on Facebook, and there's a few other people that have been. JP's been on here too, and a few other people. So really awesome having this huge participation. But my last question, and you touched on this a little bit already, I think. What do you see as the future of nature journaling?
Oh, I think there's a really important future in it, a very important, and it's multiple. On the first front, it's definitely about educating the next generation behind us, and we have, as adults, I believe, an obligation to learn the craft ourselves and pass it on. We must pass it on. We must pass the purpose of nature journaling on to those coming up behind us. It's more than just art or science, it's a culmination of both. And I think the future of nature journaling is about the future of nature communication and understanding. And it's critical and vital. And cameras are great. And I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, what's the point with art? What's the point with drawing or this or that? It's all there, it's all done." And I say that's rubbish. I think that the handwritten nature journal, the handwritten explorer's sketchbook, the field book is more important now than ever, because it's a record of direct observation and direct inquiry. And it's not just mindless acceptance of
Mm.
what we read on the internet. And it's not just, well, that was what the picture showed. There is, it's true, especially here in Australia, because there's so many species that are undocumented and there's so many creatures here that need study, that nature journalists have a tendency to discover things about these creatures and plants and flowers and habitats and biospheres that photographs can't portray. They can't, they can't communicate it as well, I think. And our nature journals are going to be a record to the legacy we leave behind for our children and a legacy for humanity in terms of, what we're seeing and what we're observing and how the changes are taking place. I think they're the things that are going to be relied on. I get asked all the time to, there were one of the botanists with one of the field groups wanted to see a sketch out of one of my small sketchbooks because it was the Banksia seed, which is quite an amazing seed.
Mhm.
And he said, I've never seen it in such detail as the drawing that I did. And he said, I had no idea. And you know what? I was drawing it. And what I didn't know, because it's very rare to find the actual seed still inside the seed pod because they're consumed by birds. And I just looked and I had it for nearly a year before I realized when I finally went to do this sketch that there were two seeds inside the seed pod.
Oh, wow.
And I planted them, and now I have two. And what turned out, it wasn't Banksia. I thought it was Banksia. It's an Illawarra flame tree, which is just this amazing Australian icon of a tree that is, when it flowers, the whole tree goes magnificent fire red and they become blinding in the sun. And so they talk about how the Illawarra flame tree is very blinding because the colors are so intense and red. Well, I've got two of them growing in pots in my garden. And I found these seeds only because I was drawing it. And I'm like, what on earth's going on here that I didn't pick up in the photograph? And this scientist wanted to see this illustration because it's the only way he could actually see the seeds still sitting in their little kind of pods inside the seed pod. It was amazing. Great experience. So I think nature journaling is more purposeful and more important for so many reasons than people realize. And I just think it's critical. Everybody should be doing it.
Wow. Oh my God. I'm about to start crying over here. Um, Thank you so much for sharing that. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of lovely comments here. People are just really enjoying it. So just one last thing, like I always ask people, if there's somewhere that people can find out more about you. I know that I've mentioned your Instagram several times, but you said that there's you wanted to share the Noosa Nature Journal Club on Facebook.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Use the Nature Journal Club if you're in the region.
Okay.
And it's a very, very popular tourist destination up here that gets a lot of people from all over the country and New Zealand love to come to the Noosa area. It is truly unique, and I can't wait to show you around, Marley.
Oh my God,
Um,
I need to go.
so at the moment, we have outings every 2 weeks, field trips, half-day field trips in the area somewhere every 2 weeks. And if people are up here on holidays or visiting or what have you, we'd love to have them come along just for the day if that's all they've got time for. It's 100% free. We don't charge anything. And we absolutely encourage beginners and people who have never, ever journaled before and just even want to observe. We get people just coming around. We had a lovely lady come along last week who just wanted to photograph and she just wanted to watch. And that was perfectly fine with us. So, and she was able to tell us quite a lot about the area we were into. So it's on Facebook, the
Yeah,
Noosa
I'll
Nature
post the
Journal
link
Club.
in the description below and people can click on it there. And I just wanted to, that sounds amazing. I just wanted to share some of these comments. Everybody's like, there's just 5 comments have come in the last, few minutes. People are really just, yeah, very inspired.
Wow, yeah, I'm seeing those.
Yeah, so thanks everybody that joined, and I think yeah, it's been great talking to you, and I'm really glad that I found you on Instagram, and everyone should check out your Instagram as well. And it sounds like maybe some people are suggesting that there be a trip to Australia to Nature Journal, and I think there has been some mention of the possibility of a whole Nature Journal gathering happening in Australia. So hopefully with like COVID sort of cycling out, that there will be an opportunity for that. But in the meantime, there's so many virtual ways we can connect, and so I'm really
Yes.
grateful to be able to talk to you tonight. Yeah, thanks for making the time.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you so much for inviting me on it. I love the show. And, I love everything you stand for. And I just love watching your exploits in nature. It's inspiring. So, some of your night journaling, Marley, was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And I love your
I have
book.
another nighttime nature journaling coming up. It's really been eye opening for me. There's we're missing a lot of hours out of the day, and there's a lot happening at those times of
Oh,
day. So
yeah. And here too, especially where I am, because it's summer all year round where I live, just it's wet or dry and it's a little bit cooler versus a little bit warmer. And the cycle of nocturnal creatures
I bet.
just amazing. I mean, they keep me awake all night because I sleep with my doors wide open and I have a net over my bed.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, there's two stories I want to share
Okay,
before I
go
let
for it.
you
Go
go.
for it. Sure.
So, yeah, not yesterday, the day before, I was standing at my kitchen window and I heard this blood curdling scream. And it was my neighbor, who is the most sweetest, loveliest lady, and she lives alone and she's just dynamic. She's dynamite. And it was a blood curdling scream. And I just called out from the window and I'm like, Maxine, are you all right? Oh, for heaven's sake, she said, I just got bitten by a snake.
Oh,
And I'm like, holy crap. And so of course, I'm getting my kids ready for school. And I just turned to my 15-year-old daughter and I said, you have to take over Thomas and get him organized. And I ran out the door. And sure enough, she's standing there. And I said, let me see. And I looked down. She had these two huge fang marks in her
oh
foot.
my God.
So I'm like, okay, what's the first aid for snake bites and all this kind of stuff? And so I got bandages and I, immobilized her, and then I compressed her leg, and then I took her off, piled the kids in the car. Lunch is half made, uniforms half on, because this is, early in the morning. And I piled her off to the emergency room. Yep, she did a nasty little snake bite. She was 14 hours in the emergency room
Oh
while
my
they were
God.
managing the snake bite. It turned out that it wasn't. She didn't get envenomated.
Oh, okay. Oh God.
Thank God. But the bite itself was very painful. So
Wow.
anyway, and then so this was quite the ordeal. Quite the ordeal, because it's the snakes are on the move right now in this part of the world. We have a lot of snakes here, and mostly they're very, very dangerous. So
Right, right.
we have a lot of snake safety, and we've had quite a few around the house lately, and so it's tricky. You got to be careful of them. But anyway, so I came home.
Did you nature journal? Were you like, hold on 1 second, Maxine, let me draw this snake bite. This is very interesting.
No, I feel really bad, but I was quite calm about the whole thing because I wanted to do the snake. I'm like
Yeah.
looking around for the snake, but it had long gone. I did when I went to see. I know, so snake bite. Okay, let's discuss this.
If it were me,
Um,
if I got bit by a snake, I would definitely have to nature journal that.
yeah, we see them all the time. But no, anyway, so I did get, when I went into the hospital several times through the day to check on her because I still had to get kids organized. I got a really good photo of the snake bite on her foot, the fang marks on her foot. So that was the best I could do. But anyway, so to top the day off, I came home and I climbed into bed and I'm just lying down. I was like exhausted because I was so worried about her all day. And I looked up, and on my net, I have this insect net over the bed, which, a lot of Aussies do around this part of the world. And there's this huge spider on the outside of the net, right over my face. I don't know what it was. But I'm like, oh my God, isn't that cool? So I'm really carefully reaching for my phone and I'm getting a photo of the underside of the spider, but all I could get was the net. So, then I get out and I go around and I'm getting all these photos of the spider on top. I don't think it was dangerous. I think it was like a wolf spider. And then I've got a specimen collection kit. So I got, the jar I get for spiders, and then I had to catch the spider. And the amazing thing was I put the jar over the spider and the spider kept jumping. Like I've never seen it do it, like leaping.
Okay.
And it kept hitting itself on the roof of my beaker. It's a little scientific beaker thing. So it's clean, clear glass so you can see 100% of it. And it just kept hitting the top of this beaker. Anyway, I was going to sit down and nature journal it, but I was so tired in the end, and I thought, I'm not keeping the poor little guy inside this jar all night long. So I just went and took him outside, released him. So
wow,
that was my day. It was quite
no
funny.
shortage of exciting things to Nature Journal in Australia, that's for sure. So
yeah.
wow. Oh, someone said people are definitely some people afraid of spiders and snakes in the audience. So but thanks for sharing all that. Those stories are amazing. It definitely makes me want to go down there, or at least just even do some more research about some of the fauna and flora that you have down there. Thank you so much. Too bad it's so late here, because it makes me want to. It's totally dark outside, but it makes me want to go. I have all this energy to go nature journal now. So
yeah.
Thank you so much for joining in the show tonight. It's been great.
No, my pleasure, and thanks for having me. As I said, it was just, you're an inspiration, and to be a part of the whole movement is a real privilege for me. So thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
Okay. Bye. And thanks for everyone who joined in for the live. Bye.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.